The parchment, brittle and stained with the sepia of forgotten time, bore the official seal of the Central Intelligence Agency, yet its contents whispered of something far older, something primordial. Declassified after nearly 7 decades of silence, a single cryptic phrase scrawled in faint, shaky ink clung to the margin of an otherwise unremarkable expedition report. Arctic, not beast, but mirror. A mirror. The word itself was a chilling whisper from a past that refused to stay buried, hinting at a truth so profound, so utterly disruptive, that its very existence had been deemed a national secret, locked away in the sterile darkness of a forgotten vault. Humanity, it suggested, was not merely observed, but understood, judged, and perhaps even mourned by something hidden in the frozen wastes. A message that promised to shatter our carefully constructed understanding of ourselves. This wasn't merely about a cryptid, a fleeting glimpse of the wild unknown. This was about a confrontation with our own reflection, seen through eyes that had watched us for millennia. Dr. Elias Thorne moved with the quiet precision of a man who spent his life deciphering unspoken languages, of codes and the nuanced silences between words. His suburban home, a modest 2-story affair nestled amongst manicured lawns, was less a dwelling and more a living archive. Books, stacked precariously on every surface, jostled for space with half-eaten meals and forgotten coffee cups. His life was solitary, punctuated only by the rhythmic click of his keyboard and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Disillusionment had become an unwelcome companion after years spent unearthing the deceit and hidden agendas that lubricated the gears of international espionage. Each solved cipher, each intercepted message, seemed only to confirm his growing cynicism about human nature, leaving him with a gnawing emptiness that even his brilliant mind couldn't quite fill. He yearned for meaning beyond the endless cycle of strategic obfuscation and geopolitical chess games. Elias, a cryptolinguist of unparalleled skill, saw patterns where others saw chaos, found narratives in discordant fragments, yet the narrative of his own life felt increasingly flat, devoid of true resonance since the quiet tragedy that had taken his wife and young daughter years ago, leaving an unfillable void in his carefully ordered world. The work, always demanding, was his only refuge. Then came the summons, a terse email from a secure server only used for the most sensitive assignments. A cold case. A file so deep in the archives it smelled of ozone and forgotten ambitions. He was given access to a series of fragmented diary entries recovered from the effects of a long-dead Arctic explorer, Captain Alistair Finch. The entries were a descent into what official agency reports had summarily dismissed as delusion, the ramblings of a man broken by isolation and the crushing weight of the polar night. Finch wrote of immense, shadowy figures moving through the blizzards, of guttural vocalizations that seemed to carry the weight of ancient sorrow, of eyes that held an uncanny intelligence staring back from the swirling snow. He spoke of a great messenger, a being of profound wisdom hidden within the ice, and of a warning it imparted to him, a message of dire consequence for all of humanity. The agency's assessment was clear. Finch suffered from extreme hypothermia and psychological breakdown, typical of solo Arctic expeditions gone awry. They considered the case closed, another bizarre footnote in the annals of Cold War-era eccentricities. But Elias saw something else. He saw the meticulous nature of Finch's nautical charts, the precise astronomical observations, the disciplined scientific mind that permeated the earlier, saner entries. Such a mind wouldn't simply unravel into fantasy without a profound external catalyst. The specific grammatical structures, The repeated stylistic choices, even the peculiar idiom shifts present in Finch's later, more erratic prose, spoke to Elias not of madness, but of an attempt to articulate the inarticulable, to translate an experience for which human language had no ready framework. There was a consistency in the explorer's delusions, a thread of logic that, while alien, refused to be dismissed as mere psychosis. Elias sensed something deeper, a submerged truth struggling to surface. The subtle shifts in Finch's linguistic patterns, the sudden adoption of archaic phrasings, the very cadence of his desperate words, resonated with Elias's finely tuned ear for linguistic anomalies. This wasn't just a deranged man. This was a man desperately trying to convey a message he barely understood himself. The agency saw static. Elias heard a faint, persistent signal beneath the noise. His fingers traced the faded ink of the diary entries, a shiver running down his spine that had nothing to do with the chilly air of his living room. The explorer's account, dismissed as mere hallucination, felt uncannily real to Elias. It mirrored the very yearning he felt for a truth uncorrupted by human machinations. He felt a profound sense of connection to this long-dead explorer, a shared understanding of a world that held more secrets than it revealed. This was more than a cold case. It was a beckoning, a silent invitation to unravel a mystery that promised to shake the very foundations of human knowledge. Elias knew, with an intensity that pulled him from his jaded apathy, that he had to follow this thread, no matter where it led. This wasn't merely a professional assignment, it was a personal quest for meaning, a silent promise to a ghost from the Arctic. Join us as we embark on this extraordinary journey into the heart of an unprecedented discovery. The truth, hidden for decades, is finally ready to emerge from the ice. Subscribe now to unravel the mysteries of the Arctic with us. Elias hunched over his desk, the faint glow of his monitor illuminating the meticulous chaos of his research, felt a gnawing disquiet. The fragmented diary entries of the Arctic explorer, initially dismissed as a descent into madness, began to coalesce into something far more sinister than delusion. He'd cross-referenced the dates, the locations, the sporadic mentions of unnatural phenomena, with official CIA expedition reports from the same era. A pattern emerged, chilling in its consistency. Whenever the explorer's narrative veered towards the inexplicable, the official reports became conspicuously vague, riddled with inconsistencies, and often blankly redacted. Entire paragraphs, sometimes whole pages, were blacked out, forming an opaque barrier between Elias and the truth. This wasn't just sloppy record-keeping or bureaucratic oversight. It was a deliberate, systematic suppression. The sheer volume of redacted material, spanning multiple Cold War-era Arctic endeavors, ostensibly meteorological, geological, or strategic intelligence missions, suggested a concerted effort to erase a shared, significant discovery. Each blacked-out line, each carefully excised paragraph, tightened a knot of suspicion in Elias's gut. What could be so profoundly unsettling, so utterly destabilizing, that it necessitated such an extensive, decades-long cover-up? The agency had deemed the explorer's vivid descriptions of a massive bipedal creature, cloaked in fur and possessing unsettling intelligence, as the ramblings of a man broken by the isolation of the Arctic. But Elias, with his trained eye for linguistic nuances and hidden meanings, increasingly saw not madness but meticulous, terrified observation. His growing unease crystallized into a concrete obstacle in the form of Director Vance. Vance embodied the very essence of what Elias had come to resent about certain echelons of the agency: an unyielding belief in control, an absolute conviction that stability trumped transparency, and that information was a weapon to be wielded. not a truth to be shared. Vance was the unyielding face of the Shadow Directorate, a clandestine branch of the CIA that operated beyond conventional oversight, dedicated to maintaining global equilibrium by carefully curating the flow of disruptive knowledge. For them, a discovery challenging humanity's place at the top of the evolutionary ladder, or revealing an ancient, hidden intelligence, would be an existential threat capable of plunging nations into chaos. Vance, with his impeccably tailored suits and eyes that seemed to constantly calculate unpalatable probabilities, saw Elias's burgeoning obsession with the Arctic files as an irritating, potentially dangerous distraction. He represented the wall Elias needed to scale, or perhaps dismantle. Undeterred by the agency's official disinterest and Vance's subtle but unmistakable disdain, Elias delved deeper. The explorer's diary, though heavily edited by subsequent government hands, contained a secondary layer of annotation. These were not the explorer's own words, but marginalia, cross-references, and coded abbreviations, almost like a desperate breadcrumb trail left by someone else who had encountered the same truth. Elias, using his crypto-linguistic expertise, painstakingly decrypted these hidden notes. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, a whispered conversation between the lines. He pieced together fragmented coordinates, not to any known military installation or research outpost, but to a location deep within the uncharted Arctic wilderness, a place officially listed as an abandoned meteorological station from the early 1950s. The station, known only by its cryptic designation, Outpost Anko 7, was supposedly dismantled decades ago due to extreme weather and logistical impossibilities. Yet, the annotations suggested otherwise. The decrypted coordinates pinpointed Outpost Echo 7. Elias felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with profound dread. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the key. He meticulously prepared a proposal, outlining the discrepancies, the hidden annotations, and the compelling likelihood of a significant, undiscovered site at the given coordinates. He requested authorization for an investigative expedition, emphasizing the historical importance and potential scientific breakthroughs. He presented it to his direct superiors, who, after several delays, forwarded it up the chain, eventually landing on Vance's desk. The resistance was immediate and absolute. Vance, through various intermediaries, systematically stonewalled Elias's every attempt. Requests for further data were denied. Access to archived satellite imagery suddenly became unavailable, and Elias found his own research terminals experiencing inexplicable glitches. Vance himself, in a brief chilling encounter in a desolate agency corridor, conveyed the message without uttering a single direct refusal. He merely looked at Elias with an expression of cold, paternalistic concern, advising him to focus on more pressing, contemporary matters and warning him against the dangers of chasing ghosts. Vance's words were laced with an unspoken threat. Pursue this further, and your carefully constructed career, your very standing within the agency, will be irrevocably jeopardized. Elias saw through the thinly veiled obfuscation. Vance wasn't protecting him. He was protecting the secret. The resistance wasn't born of bureaucratic inertia, but of deliberate, calculated suppression. The Shadow Directorate was actively working to keep Outpost Echo 7 buried, and whatever truth lay within it, permanently hidden. But the more Vance resisted, the more certain Elias became that the abandoned station in the desolate Arctic held a secret far grander and far more terrifying than anyone dared to imagine. He knew then that official channels would yield nothing but dead ends. If he wanted answers, he would have to find them himself, outside the rigid confines of the agency he had dedicated his life to. The Arctic was calling, and Elias Thorne, disillusioned and driven, knew he had to answer. The chill that gnawed at Elias Thorne's bones was not merely from the Arctic wind. It was the gnawing anxiety of a man who had chosen to burn his bridges, to step onto a path from which there was no return. He stood before the holographic projection of the Earth, a faint, almost imperceptible red dot, marking the coordinates he had painstakingly unearthed from the explorer's fragmented diary. Every instinct screamed at him to follow procedure, to present his findings, to allow the agency's vast resources to be deployed. But the cold logic of the Shadow Directorate, the calculated obstruction from Director Vance, had solidified his resolve. They wouldn't just suppress the discovery. They would corrupt it, twist its meaning to fit their narrative of control. Elias knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his often skeptical soul, that this truth, whatever it was, deserved unvarnished revelation. He had to go rogue. His meticulous mind, usually employed in deciphering ancient texts or Cold War ciphers, now mapped out a logistical nightmare. Bypassing agency protocols was akin to dismantling a perfectly calibrated clockwork from the inside, piece by delicate piece. He leveraged forgotten favors, called in debts long overdue, and exploited obscure bureaucratic loopholes he himself had once designed to catch others. A small, privately chartered cargo plane, ostensibly carrying scientific equipment for an environmental survey, was secured. Its destination, a remote, seldom-used airstrip in northern Canada, a mere jumping-off point into the unforgiving white expanse. The cover story was thin, almost translucent, but he relied on the agency's assumption that no one would dare such an audacious, unsanctioned maneuver. He was an analyst, not an operative, and that very underestimation was his most potent weapon. Vance, however, was no fool. The digital breadcrumbs Elias left, however faint, were eventually detected. A sudden surge in encrypted communications originating from Elias's previously dormant private server, a series of unusual financial transactions, the subtle inquiries about specialized Arctic gear. These anomalies, when pieced together by Vance's sophisticated surveillance apparatus, painted a disturbing picture. The director's lips thinned into a hard line. Elias Thorne, the quiet cryptolinguist, was not just poking around. He was actively pursuing the ghost of a Cold War secret. Vance mobilized, discreetly at first, then with increasing urgency. Elias was not merely a rogue agent, he was a potential existential threat to the Shadow Directorate's carefully constructed world order. The journey itself was a brutal baptism. Elias, accustomed to the sterile hum of server rooms and the hushed quiet of academic libraries, was thrust into a landscape of stark, primordial power. The small Twin Otter turboprop bucked and swayed through blizzards that reduced visibility to mere feet. Inside the cramped cabin, the drone of the engines was a constant, mind-numbing companion. He battled hypothermia with every layer of advanced thermal clothing, fought off frostbite with constant vigilance, and wrestled with the gnawing isolation that crept in as the known world receded behind him. Each day was a testament to human fragility against nature's indifference. The constant fear of being discovered was a third, invisible passenger, always lurking at the edge of his awareness. He scanned the horizon, not just for the landmarks on his antiquated maps, but for any sign of a tail, any telltale contrail in the impossibly vast sky. He had learned to track the subtle signs of human presence from his training. Discarded rations, unnatural disturbances in flora, the faintest imprint of a boot. But out here, in the raw, untamed wilderness, he began to notice something else entirely. Near a cluster of oddly shaped granite formations, he found a succession of small, intricately arranged stones, almost like markers, leading subtly deeper into a narrow ravine. They were too deliberate for natural formation, too symmetrical for simple animal activity. Further on, near a frozen riverbed, he discovered a series of perfectly circular depressions in the otherwise pristine snow, too large for any known animal, too uniform for random impact. They faded quickly, almost as if designed to be transient. These were not the crude signs of an exploratory party. They spoke of a different kind of intelligence, a subtle, almost ethereal presence that understood how to move through this environment without leaving a scar. Days bled into weeks. His compass and GPS became his only reliable companions, guiding him towards the coordinates that felt less like a destination and more like a pilgrimage. He navigated treacherous ice fields, scaled wind-scoured ridges, and endured nights spent huddled in a makeshift shelter, the silence broken only by the howl of the wind and the crack of shifting ice. Then, almost imperceptibly, the landscape began to change. The ice formations, once jagged and chaotic, started to show signs of unnatural symmetry. He noticed a recurrent pattern, a subtle carving on the face of a massive ice shelf, a series of geometric lines, unlike any he had ever seen in human art or ancient pictographs. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, he pressed closer. As the weak Arctic sun caught the ice at just the right angle, the forms became undeniably clear. They were carvings, deeply etched into the ancient ice, depicting figures remarkably similar to the explorer's frantic descriptions in the diary. Not crude, simplistic renderings, but sophisticated, almost stylized depictions of large, bipedal beings. They possessed a stoic dignity, an undeniable intelligence in their broad foreheads and deep-set eyes. One carving showed a hand with unusually long fingers, reaching towards a celestial body. Another depicted a gathering of these beings around a glowing orb. Elias ran a gloved hand over the cold, smooth surface of the ice, a tremor running through him. The explorer hadn't been delusional. His fragmented words, his frantic scrawls about a gentle giant and the watchers of the world, were not the ravings of a broken mind, but the desperate attempts to convey an unimaginable truth. These were not the work of early human settlers. They predated any known civilization in the region by millennia. The sophistication of the artistry, the sheer scale of the carvings within the ice itself, solidified his belief. This was it. This was the irrefutable evidence. He wasn't chasing a ghost. He was on the verge of uncovering a lost history, a secret deliberately buried beneath layers of ice and official deceit. The Shadow Directorate's efforts to stop him now felt like a desperate, futile gesture against the tide of inevitable revelation. He was closer than ever, and the truth, whatever it was a physical presence now, emanating from the ancient ice around him. The ancient ice carvings served as an immutable compass, guiding Elias with an almost mystical precision. He followed their silent, frozen narrative deeper into the uncharted labyrinth of the Arctic, each new etching solidifying his conviction that he was on the right path, towards a truth far grander and more profound than any he had ever imagined. The cold bit at his skin, but his resolve burned fiercely, fueled by the accelerating heartbeat of discovery. He noticed a shift in the consistency of the ice beneath his boots, a subtle alteration in its density and color, as if he were walking on something artificial, masked by millennia of natural accretion. Then, indistinct at first, a faint, almost geometric anomaly appeared on the horizon, shrouded in the persistent white haze of the polar environment. It was too regular, too structured to be a natural formation. As he drew closer, the anomaly resolved into an unmistakable shape, a massive, partially buried structure, its metallic gleam dulled by centuries of glacial ice and wind-driven snow. It was an entrance, or what remained of one, to an edifice of incredible scale. This was it, the research station, not just a crude outpost, but a monumental undertaking, far exceeding anything the Cold War-era explorers could have constructed. He approached with a mixture of awe and trepidation, his breath clouding in the sub-zero air. The sheer audacity of its concealment, the impossibility of its design in this desolate landscape, spoke volumes about the secrets it harbored. He found a breach in the exterior hull, a rent likely caused by the slow, inexorable movement of the glacier, or perhaps an ancient impact. Squeezing through the narrow opening, he found himself in a cavernous chamber, dimly lit by what appeared to be bioluminescent panels embedded in the walls, their soft, ethereal glow pulsating gently even after countless centuries. The air inside was still and surprisingly temperate, carrying a faint metallic scent. This was no abandoned human base. The technology was alien, its materials unlike any he had ever seen. Sleek, seamless surfaces, unidentifiable alloys, and intricate conduits snaked along the walls, humming with a low, latent energy. It was a fusion of advanced engineering and ecological integration, as if the structure itself was a living entity. Elias moved cautiously through the labyrinthine corridors, his headlamp cutting through the deeper shadows. He passed through laboratories filled with dormant instruments of bewildering complexity, observation decks overlooking vast subterranean ice caverns, and living quarters that spoke of long-term habitation. Everything suggested an advanced civilization, not a temporary human expedition. The sheer scale and sophistication were overwhelming. He touched a console, its surface warm and smooth, and a cascade of intricate symbols, a language he did not recognize, momentarily flickered across a display screen. This place was a treasure trove, a silent testament to a presence that had existed here for far longer than human history accounted for. His journey culminated in a vast central chamber, dominated by a series of colossal, cylindrical units, arranged in a silent, watchful circle. These were cryogenic chambers, unmistakably so, their transparent fronts revealing perfectly preserved forms. One, larger than the rest, drew his eye with an irresistible pull. Within its shimmering confines lay the creature, the being that had haunted the explorer's diary, the legend whispered in hushed tones for generations. The Bigfoot. It was not the feral beast of folklore, nor the lumbering ape of sensationalist accounts. This was a being of profound presence, its massive form encased in a dense, dark fur, its features undeniably hominid, yet imbued with an almost regal dignity. Its eyes, closed in timeless slumber, were deep-set beneath a prominent brow, hinting at an intelligence that transcended the purely animalistic. The sheer scale was breathtaking, easily over 9 feet tall, broad-shouldered and powerfully built. Yet there was a grace to its proportions, a quiet strength that spoke of evolution far beyond humanity's current understanding. This was not a primitive beast, but a perfectly preserved specimen of an advanced species. The very air around the chamber seemed to hum with the latent energy of its suspended animation. Overcoming the initial shock, Elias noticed a console at the base of the central cryogenic chamber, distinct from the others, adorned with a single, glowing symbol. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and an undeniable sense of destiny, he hesitantly pressed it. The chamber's ambient hum intensified, and the air crackled with a sudden surge of power. The bioluminescent panels in the chamber pulsed brighter, illuminating the Bigfoot's form with an almost reverent light. Then, from the central console, A beam of light shot upwards, hitting the domed ceiling. The ceiling shimmered, transforming into a vast, holographic projection. Abstract shapes coalesced, then solidified into complex three-dimensional images. Stars spun into galaxies, then zoomed into planetary systems. Elias watched, mesmerized, as an entire cosmic history unfolded before him. Ancient glyphs, far more intricate than any earthly language, began to scroll across the holographic display, accompanied by resonant, harmonic tones that seemed to vibrate directly within his chest. It was a vast repository of knowledge, a sophisticated data projection, a library of light and sound. It was clear that this was not merely a random activation. It was a deliberate interface, an intentional legacy left behind. The Bigfoot had not merely existed, it had observed, compiled, and encoded. This was their message, their story, waiting for eyes capable of understanding. Elias, the cryptolinguist, felt a rush of both daunting responsibility and exhilarating intellectual challenge. He had found not just a creature, but a message, a voice from the profound silence of antiquity. The implications for humanity were staggering, echoing through the vast silent hall. The holographic projections shimmered with an ethereal glow, filling the cavernous chamber of the ice-entombed station with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Elias, his breath pluming in the frigid air, felt a dizzying surge of intellectual exhilaration mixed with profound awe. This wasn't merely a data display. It was a living chronicle, a tapestry woven from light and energy, waiting to be unraveled. His cryptolinguistic expertise, honed over decades of dissecting human languages, now faced its ultimate test. He adjusted the advanced goggles he'd salvaged from the station's lab, which automatically translated the alien syntax into a comprehensible stream of information directly into his mind, bypassing the limitations of spoken or written human language. It was less a translation and more a direct neural interface, a communion of minds across untold eons. The initial flood of data was overwhelming. Complex geometric constructs representing mathematical principles far beyond contemporary human understanding. Intricate astronomical charts detailing star systems, yet undiscovered by Earth's telescopes, and biological schematics outlining life forms unlike anything documented in terrestrial science. But beneath this scientific grandeur, a narrative began to emerge, forming a coherent story, the true history of the beings he now knew as the Sasquatch. Their origins were not of Earth, but from a distant, verdant world, a planet of towering flora and harmonious ecosystems. They had been explorers, not conquerors, their civilization having achieved a level of technological and spiritual advancement that prioritized understanding and symbiosis over exploitation. They had arrived on Earth millennia ago, drawn by its nascent life, not to colonize, but to observe, to learn, and if necessary, to guide. Their story on Earth was one of quiet guardianship. They had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, the tumultuous birth of new species, the slow, relentless march of geological change. They saw humanity emerge from the primordial mists, a species brimming with raw potential and terrifying contradictions. For generations they had lived among early humans, often perceived as mythical creatures, benevolent spirits of the forest, or fearsome giants, depending on the cultural lens. They shared knowledge when humanity was receptive, offering subtle nudges towards sustainable practices and peaceful coexistence, always careful not to overtly interfere with the natural progression of human consciousness. Their advanced technology remained hidden, used only to maintain their sanctuary and to conduct their observations with minimal impact. Then came the turning point. a pivotal moment in the holographic narrative, depicted not with grand battles, but with the subtle, insidious creep of discord. It was a period marked by humanity's accelerating pace of technological development, coupled with a regression in their collective empathy. The Sasquatch had observed the relentless cycles of conflict, the burgeoning greed, the insatiable desire for dominance, and the shocking disregard for the natural world that sustained them. They saw the seeds of self-destruction sown deep within the human psyche, nurtured by fear and ignorance. The message wasn't delivered with anger or judgment, but with a profound, almost melancholic understanding. It was a lament for what humanity could have been, for the path not taken. The core of their message resonated with a chilling clarity. Humanity was on a collision course with itself, driven by an inherent imbalance between its extraordinary intellect and its underdeveloped emotional intelligence. They detailed humanity's propensity for creating complex systems of destruction, for prioritizing short-term gains over long-term survival, for building towering empires on foundations of injustice and exploitation. The holographic data showed projections, models of environmental collapse, social fragmentation, and existential threats, all stemming from humanity's own choices, its inability to transcend tribalism and embrace a global consciousness. It was a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting every flaw, every missed opportunity for growth. Elias felt a cold dread settle deep in his gut. This wasn't some alien invasion scenario or a call to worship an ancient deity. This was a cautionary tale, delivered with the gentle wisdom of an observer who had seen it all before. The Sasquatch hadn't intervened because they understood the delicate balance of free will. True growth had to come from within. Instead, they had retreated, not in defeat, but in a desperate hope. They had built this station, compiled this vast repository of knowledge, not as a monument to their own existence, but as a final, desperate plea to humanity. It was a message of love, born from disappointment, a final attempt to avert the inevitable catastrophe they foresaw. The emotional impact on Elias was staggering. His own disillusionment, the quiet despair he often felt, witnessing humanity's endless capacity for cruelty and blindness, now found a voice, an ancient echo from a species that had experienced it firsthand. The academic detachment he usually maintained when deciphering codes vanished, replaced by a raw, visceral understanding. He saw the faces of the children orphaned by wars, the desolate landscapes scarred by industry, the hollow eyes of those consumed by ambition, all reflected in the Sasquatch's narrative. His personal loss, the quiet grief he carried, felt like a microcosm of this larger planetary sorrow. He realized the true horror of the Shadow Directorate's mission. They weren't just covering up a creature. They were burying a profound truth, a final warning that could either condemn humanity or offer it a chance at redemption. The Sasquatch had chosen to retreat into the ice, preserving their knowledge for a time when humanity might finally be ready to listen, to truly understand. And now, Elias, a lowly cryptolinguist haunted by his own demons, was the unexpected recipient of this invaluable wisdom. A crushing weight of responsibility settled upon his shoulders. He couldn't let this knowledge remain buried. He had to share it no matter the cost. His life had been defined by codes and secrets, but this secret, this message, demanded to be shouted from the highest peaks. The future of humanity, it seemed, might rest on the fragile thread of his discovery, the stark reality of his situation, pressed in as the pale Arctic sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across the endless white expanse. Elias knew with a sickening certainty that his time was running out. The activation of the ancient technology, however subtle, would have sent ripples through the digital ether, a beacon announcing his unauthorized presence. Director Vance, with his chilling efficiency, would undoubtedly already be orchestrating his retrieval, or more likely, his permanent silencing. He pictured Vance's cold, calculating eyes narrowing with displeasure, the wheels of the Shadow Directorate turning with ruthless precision. Elias had bypassed their protocols, uncovered their secrets, and now he had awakened something they had sought to bury forever. There was no turning back, only forward, into the relentless embrace of the Arctic and the looming threat of discovery. He understood now, with a clarity that bordered on reverence, the profound purpose behind the Bigfoot species message. It wasn't a plea for help, nor a demand for salvation. It was a final, meticulously crafted testament, a last hope for humanity to course-correct before it was too late. They had observed humanity for millennia, seen the cyclical nature of its conflicts, the insatiable hunger for power, the self-destructive tendencies that simmered beneath the surface of every civilization. Their retreat to the Arctic wasn't an act of cowardice, but a deeply wise recognition of humanity's inability to live in harmony with their own advanced, peaceful ways. The Bigfoot species, these silent watchers, had reached a point where their harmonious existence was threatened by the sheer chaotic energy of human expansion. They had chosen preservation over confrontation, retreat over assimilation, leaving behind a wisdom bomb, a time capsule of their observations and insights, a mirror held up to humanity's soul. This knowledge, meticulously preserved, was their legacy, their final gift to a species teetering on the brink of self-destruction. A cold dread settled in Elias's stomach, mingling with a fierce determination. He had to secure this data. The alien interface, though complex, was beginning to yield to his persistent linguistic and cryptographic assaults. Images flickered across the holographic projections, ancient star charts, biological diagrams of flora and fauna unknown to human science, and unsettling projections of climate shifts and geopolitical upheavals eerily similar to humanity's worst nightmares. Each piece of information was a puzzle, but a critical one, painting a picture of a civilization that had mastered sustainability, interspecies communication, and a profound respect for the delicate balance of life, only to eventually isolate themselves from a world too boisterous and violent for their serene existence. He struggled with the intricacies of the data transfer protocols, the sheer volume of information staggering. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. He worked frantically, his breath misting in the frigid air of the ancient chamber, the ever-present hum of the station's technology, a low thrum against the vast silence of the Arctic. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour a lifetime. He could almost feel Vance's shadow stretching across the icy landscape, his agents undoubtedly converging on this very spot. His ears strained for any sound beyond the groan of shifting ice and the wind whistling past the station's partially buried walls. The thought of the Shadow Directorate getting their hands on this, twisting it, weaponizing it, or worse, burying it forever, fueled his desperate efforts. This knowledge wasn't meant for control. It was meant for awakening. He knew Vance would stop at nothing. The director's primary objective was always stability. And to Vance, stability meant control, meant the suppression of anything that could disrupt the established order. A species that had observed and understood humanity's flaws for millennia. A species with a message of profound peace and self-reflection would be the ultimate destabilizing force. It challenged the very foundations of human ambition, conquest, and resource exploitation. Elias realized that the Shadow Directorate didn't just want to hide what the Bigfoot was. They wanted to erase what it said. They feared the truth, not the creature. He managed to isolate key sections of the data: the historical observations of human behavior, the warnings of environmental collapse, the philosophical underpinnings of the Bigfoot's peaceful coexistence. These were the core messages, the most potent truths, the ones that could ignite a spark of change, or at least plant a seed of doubt in the minds of those who held power. The interface, though alien, responded to his determined inputs, the data streams beginning to flow into a secure, encrypted drive he had prepared. The flickering readouts showed a painfully slow progress. He was racing against an invisible clock, a race he knew he was quickly losing. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the station. It wasn't the natural shifting of ice. It was a rhythmic thud, growing steadily louder, accompanied by the distant whir of rotors. Vance. They were here. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He gripped the data drive, its cold metallic surface a tangible link to the truth he was fighting to preserve. There was no more time for comprehensive downloads. He had to be strategic, prioritize, and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The message, the profound, resonant truth of the Bigfoot, would not die with him. He would ensure that, one way or another, it found its way into the world. He just needed a little more time, a sliver of an opportunity to complete his desperate mission. The fight for humanity's soul was about to begin, and Elias Thorne, a lone cryptolinguist in the heart of the Arctic, was its unlikely champion. The rhythmic thudding intensified, vibrating through the metal floor plates of the station, a stark counterpoint to Elias's racing pulse. The whir of rotors became a deafening roar as a black, unmarked helicopter descended heavily onto the ice field directly above them, its downwash scattering snow and ice chips against the ancient structure. There was no mistaking the intent. Vance's team had arrived, and their entry would be swift and brutal. Elias knew he was cornered, but the years of deciphering cryptic messages, of understanding the hidden logic behind the chaos, had forged an unbreakable resolve within him. He was a man of words and codes, not weapons, yet he was prepared to make his stand. With a final, desperate surge of his linguistic prowess, Elias initiated a rapid data transfer. It wasn't the full, comprehensive history, not even half. It was a carefully curated package of the most potent emotional and philosophical insights from the Bigfoot archives. The core warnings, the reflections on human destructive cycles, and the undeniable proof of their advanced sentience. He directed this partial data package not to an internal agency server, but to a series of secure, independent academic and journalistic networks he had discreetly cultivated over his disillusioned years. It was a Hail Mary, a gamble on the inherent human desire for truth, hoping that enough pieces would land in fertile ground to spark a wider inquiry. As the transfer progress bar crawled agonizingly forward, Elias activated another, more immediate protocol. He initiated a timed self-destruction sequence for the entire station. The ancient technology, so carefully preserved, would soon be obliterated, taking with it the vast majority of the Bigfoot data and any physical evidence. Vance would find a smoking crater, not a treasure trove. Heavy footsteps echoed down the main corridor, punctuated by the metallic clang of boots on steel. A moment later, the hatch to the central chamber burst open, revealing a squad of heavily armed agents, their faces grim under tactical goggles. Leading them was Director Vance, his usually impassive face etched with a rare flicker of cold fury. His gaze swept over the complex holographic projections of Bigfoot history, still illuminating the chamber. then landed squarely on Elias, who stood defiantly amidst the collapsing data streams. "Thorn." Vance's voice was a low growl, cutting through the whirring machinery. "You've made a grave error. This information, this fabrication, threatens global stability." "Fabrication?" Elias retorted, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "It's the truth, Vance. A truth that predates us. A truth about us. The Bigfoot isn't a monster. It's an ancient observer. A sentient species that understood humanity's flaws with heartbreaking clarity. This data isn't a threat. It's a mirror." Vance took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "A mirror? Or a weapon designed to destabilize the very order we fought to maintain? What exactly have you sent out, Thorn, and to whom?" "Enough," Elias said, his voice gaining strength. "To plant the seeds of doubt. Enough to make people question the narrative, to look beyond the convenient lies. This species witnessed human history, Vance. Our cycles of aggression, our disregard for our planet, our insatiable need for power. They saw it all, and they left a message, not of revenge, but of lament. A profound truth about our future, if we don't change." As Elias spoke, the lights in the chamber flickered erratically. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the entire structure, growing in intensity. It was the activation of the self-destruct sequence. Vance, always attuned to the subtle shifts in his environment, recognized the sound. His eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something akin to genuine surprise, even doubt, crossing his features. He saw the holographic projections begin to pixelate and dissolve, the machinery groaning under an unseen force. What Elias was describing: an ancient, sentient observer, a profound truth about humanity, struck a nerve, even in Vance's hardened psyche. The implications, if true, were staggeringly disruptive, not just to his controlled order, but to the very foundation of human self-perception. That fleeting moment of uncertainty, that chink in Vance's impenetrable armor, was Elias's turning point. "You can't bury this, Vance!" Elias yelled over the escalating noise, his eyes fixed on the director's momentarily unguarded expression. "Not all of it. Not anymore." Suddenly, a series of concussions ripped through the station. Explosions rocked the foundations, sending dust and debris raining down. The agents instinctively ducked, their formation breaking. Elias seized the opportunity. He had meticulously planned his exit, a hidden access tunnel known only to a few, designed for emergency Arctic egress. A flashbang grenade, salvaged from an old agency supply cache, detonated with a blinding white light and a deafening report, disorienting Vance and his team. When their vision cleared, the chamber was filled with smoke and rapidly collapsing structural elements. Elias was gone. The self-destruction sequence was in full swing, the ancient station groaning its last. Vance, regaining his composure, cursed under his breath. He ordered his agents to search, but it was futile. The station was coming down around them. He had to assume Thorn, and with him, the immediate threat of the full data leak, had been eradicated in the explosion. It was a victory, in a grim, Pyrrhic sense. But the flicker of doubt Elias had ignited remained. Vance had secured the secret, but he couldn't shake the unsettling echo of Elias's words, the profound truth about humanity's future. Elias, meanwhile, was already navigating the icy depths of the emergency tunnel. The sounds of the station's final, cataclysmic destruction muffled behind him. His body was bruised, his lungs burned with the effort, but in his pocket, clutched tight, was a small, encrypted drive containing the critical, albeit partial, data. He was a ghost in the system now, a man officially dead, but alive with a purpose far greater than any he had ever known. The weight of the world, and the promise of a potentially redemptive truth, rested in his hands. He had faked his own death, ensuring Vance believed the threat was contained. But the real work, the slow, arduous process of awakening humanity, had only just begun. The first blast reverberated through the ancient station, shaking ice and debris from the ceiling. Vance's team was breaching. Elias, anticipating this, had already initiated the last-ditch protocol. He crammed the partially filled data drive into a specialized hardened casing, securing it to a small, nearly invisible drone hidden within a cavity in his pack. Activating its silent propulsion, he sent it soaring through a concealed vent, a tiny defiant arrow aimed at the vast, indifferent sky, carrying the fragile hope of a world yet unaware. The drone's signal, encoded and decentralized, would jump across an intricate web of independent servers, slowly but surely scattering the Bigfoot's fragmented wisdom across the digital ether. He then set the station's ancient self-destruct sequence, an irreversible cascade that would not only erase the remaining data but also obliterate the physical evidence of this profound discovery. A low, ominous hum began to build, signaling the rapid destabilization of the cryogenic chambers and the advanced alien technology. Within moments, the entrance to the main chamber buckled inward as Vance himself, flanked by heavily armed operatives, strode through the gaping hole. His eyes, cold and analytical, immediately locked onto Elias. "Thorn." Vance's voice was calm, almost disappointed, echoing strangely in the rapidly deteriorating environment. "I had hoped you'd be more pragmatic. This was always about control, not revelation." Elias stood his ground amidst the thrumming, vibrating machinery, a defiant figure in a scene of impending chaos. "Control of what, Vance?" "The truth. The truth always finds a way. And this truth, it's too important to be buried." His gaze swept past Vance to the operatives, then back to the director, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "They aren't monsters, Vance. They were observers, teachers, and they left something for us, something you're desperately trying to destroy." Vance's expression remained impassive. "Disruptive information, Thorn. That's all it is. A story that would shatter civilizations, ignite panic, dismantle every established order. We protect humanity from itself." "No," Elias retorted, raising his voice above the growing whine of the self-destruct. "You protect your idea of humanity. You protect ignorance. This message isn't about fear. It's about reflection. It's about our collective future." He gestured wildly around the chamber as sections of the wall groaned and cracked. "Look around, Vance. This isn't a weapon. It's a library, a warning from a species that watched us stumble and fall for millennia, hoping we'd finally learn." The ground beneath them quivered violently. Vance's men began to look uneasy, their professionalism warring with instinctual fear. "He's bluffing, sir," one operative shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. "He's not," Elias said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "The station is already unstable. It's a controlled demolition, Vance. The data, the technology, everything. Gone. And your cover-up, your precious stability, will collapse with it." Vance finally showed a flicker of emotion, a barely perceptible tightening around his mouth. "The drone," he hissed, his eyes narrowing, understanding dawning. "You sent something out, didn't you?" Elias allowed a small, tired smile to touch his lips. "Enough, Vance. Enough to spark a conversation. Enough to make people ask questions you won't be able to answer. The data I sent, it's not just about an ancient species. It's about humanity, through their eyes. A mirror, Vance. A very uncomfortable mirror." The structural integrity of the station was failing rapidly now. Ice shards rained down, accompanied by the shriek of twisting metal. One of Vance's operatives stumbled as the floor beneath him lurched. Vance, sensing the true peril, barked orders. "Fall back! Extract! Now!" As his team scrambled for the exit, Vance held Elias's gaze for a final, long moment. There was a faint, almost imperceptible doubt in the director's eyes, a seed of uncertainty that Elias hoped would blossom into something more profound. Then, with a final, hard look, Vance turned and dissolved into the chaos of his retreating squad. Elias, knowing his purpose was fulfilled, did not follow. He turned towards the accelerating heart of the dying station, towards the cryogenic chamber where the Bigfoot lay entombed, a silent sentinel of forgotten wisdom. A massive tremor ripped through the chamber, and a crack snaked across the ice directly beneath his feet. He allowed himself to be swallowed by the collapsing structure, his disappearance a final, necessary act to ensure the world believed the threat, and the message had been buried forever. His sacrifice was not in vain. It was a strategically executed retreat, a final, brilliant misdirection performed by a master cryptolinguist. Weeks turned into months. Elias Thorne, a ghost in the system, operated from the fringes, watching his carefully sown seeds begin to sprout. The initial fragments of the Bigfoot's data, initially dismissed as fringe conspiracy theories, slowly gained traction. Independent researchers, cryptographers, and whistleblowers, drawn by the sheer weight of the anomalous information, began to piece together the narrative. The story of an ancient, sentient species, observing humanity for millennia, became too compelling to ignore. Headlines appeared, cautious at first, then bolder. Arctic anomaly, declassified data hints at sentient non-human observers. The Bigfoot's lament, a warning from the ice. The world, initially skeptical, was slowly but surely forced to confront the uncomfortable truths presented by this ancient wisdom. The data, though incomplete, painted a stark picture of humanity's destructive patterns, its relentless cycles of conflict, and its profound disconnect from the natural world. It was a mirror held up to global society, reflecting its flaws with an unsettling clarity. Protests erupted, demanding transparency, demanding a reevaluation of global priorities. Environmental movements gained unprecedented momentum. Diplomatic conversations shifted, infused with a new, profound urgency. Elias, watching from the shadows, felt a quiet sense of triumph, intertwined with a profound loneliness. He was a man without a country, without a past, defined only by the future he helped ignite. Yet, in the quiet solitude of his new existence, he found a profound purpose. The world was beginning a slow, often painful process of self-reflection. Humanity, for the first time in recorded history, was truly listening to an ancient, alien whisper, allowing it to guide its collective conscience. It was a testament to the enduring power of truth and the potential for redemption that even the most flawed species held within itself. The story of humanity, reshaped by the wisdom of the Bigfoot, had truly just begun. What do you think this revelation means for humanity? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the unknown. Click here to watch our next video on other classified discoveries.